Welcome. Welcome to the Marketplace session, Sustainability of Biodiversity Conservation, Too Expensive for Humans, or Can We Find Solutions? Before we start, I would like to acknowledge the First Nations owners of the land on which I stand, the Turrbal, Jagera and Yugara peoples. I pay respects to their elders, laws, customs and creation spirits. I would also like to acknowledge the Quandamooka peoples, whose land is illustrated in the image behind me. This session is sponsored by the Belmont Forum CRA project, PARSEC, Building New Tools for Data Sharing and Reuse through a transnational investigation of the socioeconomic impacts of protected areas, which has partners from 5 countries, Brazil, France, Japan, and the USA, and associates in Australia. We have gathered 5 speakers for this session from Brazil, Australia, and the USA, including 2 from the PARSEC team, who will share their different perspectives and solutions around the socioeconomic factors influencing practical community and government attitudes and actions, Indigenous involvement, and the opportunities arising from technological innovation and knowledge sharing, and their importance for the future. We hope you'll be stimulated by these examples and look forward to your comments and questions in the chat on the session page, and we'll answer as many of them at the end of the session as we can. Each speaker has 7 minutes to allow as much time as possible for that. The session will be recorded, so if you don't wish to be seen, do turn off your video and your microphone or heard. So, with great pleasure, we can start the proceedings. Our first speaker is Silvio Marchini from the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil. Silvio is a conservation scientist with 20 years experience. Over the last 5 years, he has turned his interest to systematic planning and policy and the ways to bridge the gap between researchers, planners, managers, and policymakers. He's a PARSEC affiliate, as you'll see. Thank you, Silvio. Over to you.
Thank you, Alison. Thank you, everyone, for joining us in the search for an answer to the question, is biodiversity conservation too expensive for humans? Conservation is fundamentally about change. It's about solving conservation problems for the benefit of threatened species and their habitats. However, conservation problems are not with wildlife and their habitats, but ultimately with people. People are the problem, and therefore people must be the solution, or at least part of it. Change must start with people. But our knowledge of how to bring about change and its outcomes is too often incomplete. Besides, the costs and benefits of change are not always distributed equally among the parties involved. Not surprisingly, some people oppose the change. In response, conservation, the science and practice, has been expanding its scope, systematically incorporating biophysical and also human considerations into decision-making. In addition, there is a growing recognition of the importance of stakeholder participation. My talk today is about a process that combines these elements to create a roadmap for change, the process of planning. Simply put, planning is the process of thinking about the activities required to achieve a desired goal. I have been working on how to plan for human-wildlife coexistence. Planning for coexistence may provide useful insights for conservation planning in general, as it addresses explicitly wildlife and people together, taking into account tangible and also intangible costs and benefits. We call the workshop process that we've been developing Plan for COEX. And a key component of our workshop process is a framework that integrates ecological and social considerations. The framework consists of 2 axes, one for the situation of wildlife and the other for the situation of people. Examples of parameters describe people's situation include tangible factors such as economic impact and intangible factors such as fear and satisfaction. And here is where social sciences play a vital role in conceptualizing and operationalizing these parameters. These two axes define four fundamentally different classes of human-wildlife interactions. In the left half of the figure, we have a conservation problem. The wildlife is in a bad situation. Conservationists have focused their efforts here to shift the situation to the right. But in the lower half of the figure, we have a social problem. And the goal here is to move the situation up. And for COEX, considers these two dimensions in an integrated way, using this framework as a map where conservationists can see the current status of the species and stakeholders involved in the interactions of interest, where they want to go from there. In other words, what changes they want to cause, and show that they did it. The next question then is how to get there. And this takes us to the other component of the workshop process, the theory of change. The theory of change is essentially a comprehensive description and illustration of how and why a desired change is expected to happen in a particular context. Jaguars of Iguaçu is one of the projects with which we have been collaborating. Their ultimate goal is to cause the right changes so that jaguars and the local community around Iguaçu National Park can thrive together. With that goal in mind, the project has been carrying out a number of activities that produce a variety of outputs. Too often, conservationists simply presume the outputs of their activities will translate into the desired impact. We use facilitation techniques to help workshop participants think systematically about the direct and indirect causes of the situation at hand so that they can better understand what is inside that black box that separates what they're doing from what they want to achieve. These are the direct and indirect effects of the project, according to the collective knowledge of the workshop participants. Systems thinking helped participants to identify also some feedback loops and unintended effects of their activities. These are all outcomes that the project team believes it can measure to assess the efficacy of their activities. The more evidence-based, structured, and participatory decision-making process, in other words, the better the planning, the better we will understand the costs and benefits of conservation in the pursuit of changes that are fair, that are just for all the parties involved, changes that are affordable rather than too expensive for people. Of course, we have some challenges ahead, and one of them is the acquisition of social data. Social researchers still rely on conventional data collection techniques, such as in-person interviews, that generate relatively small amount of data. There are some promising ways to fill this gap. Some of them are organized in this diagram. Two other members of Parsec project and myself used for a book chapter. The figure shows how planning, in this case, planning to turn human-wildlife conflict into coexistence, can be a process that integrates researchers and practitioners. The figure highlights the sources of evidence, the sources of data for this planning process. Citizens have growingly contributed to conservation decision-making as a source of data. They contribute relevant data intentionally, as in citizen science, and also unintentionally every time they express or report their thoughts, feelings, and actions towards wildlife and conservation on social media, for example. The framework acknowledges the important role played by data scientists in this increasingly data-intensive field and the role of planners in guiding the whole process. Capacity building in these specific fields in some parts of the world could be a priority for global conservation. Another important challenge ahead is the development of strategies and mechanisms to promote and implement truly transdisciplinary research and collaboration. Thank you.